Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and today we're going to have our second 2023-2024 winter look ahead. Now last week we looked at many climate drivers and what they could be doing over the winter period, including the ENSO region and the polar vortex, and even hinted at some of the long range ECMWF and CFS charts. Now in today's video we're going to have a look at more ECMWF charts that they have now updated to their September base time. So data that's only come out in the last few days, and we'll have a look at some of the Copernicus data for the UK Met Office run, also the JMA run, and we'll have a look at some of the 10 HPA charts as well from various runs, and we'll also have a look at the multi-model run, which is where they've smashed together all the different anomalies from all the various models to see what the cross-model consensus is roughly what the models are showing. And we'll have a look at that right at the end of the video, and it is fascinating because I must put that out there, from the looks of these models there does look like a very good chance of some blocking coming up through the winter. Now I know we do regularly see charts in the longer range that does have a blocking pattern, but we are seeing some real consistency here from some of the big models, not only in their individual runs, the Met Office run, the ECMWF run, but in that cross-model consensus. At the end of the video you'll see there is quite a big signal for higher than average mean sea level pressure out to our north and our west, lower mean sea level pressure towards Scandinavia, northern Europe, indicating northerly flows could be dominating, or could at least appear more than normal. And again, can't say this for certain, but that would indicate an above average chance of cold and wintry weather, especially early on in the winter, which is what we have the most data for at the moment, but could even stretch into the new year as well. And there have been rumblings over social media about this as well, as we all have access to the same data, and that's what these longer term models are showing at the moment. So I'll explain why they're showing that, or what in the model is giving us a cold and wintry impression, and we'll see what they all do show. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. So to start on the latest ECMWF mean sea level pressure charts, this is the latest September run, so it really only just came out. The August run was cold and wintry, with big blocking out to our north and our west that we saw last week. So it'll be very interesting to see, do we have a similar pattern today? Now these do go in 3-month periods, so this is the chart here is the October, November, December period, so it is quite a spread, but it still can give us a good consensus of what the general pattern will be throughout the autumn and winter period. Now here we've got high pressure out to our west, but it's well out to our west, out towards northern Canada. This would indicate the jet stream heading northwards through Greenland and diving southwards toward the central and northern Atlantic. This would keep the UK in a pocket of low pressure and would indicate quite an unsettled autumn. And it doesn't sound like that considering the weather we're seeing this week with absolutely balmy heatwave conditions, but that's what this model is showing here. If we do progress towards the November, December, January period, we still see a similar pattern, but that high pressure signal is more towards Greenland. Again, perhaps signs of higher pressure towards Greenland, lower pressure to our south, maybe indicating northerly or easterly winds. Not a massive signal, but perhaps that's what it could be indicating. December, January, February, that anomaly increases in strength. Over Greenland, we're seeing a massive block. Now, it's not like some charts where you can just see a whole array of yellow to our north, and we can say, oh, big blocking coming, but that's really unrealistic. Normally, we do see a block in somewhere, we will see lower pressure dive southward somewhere else. Here, we are seeing a very strong blocking signal, but it primarily is over northern Canada, and Greenland extends towards Iceland, lots of blues towards central, southern Europe out towards the Med, and that would indicate the storm track to our south with northerly or maybe easterly winds. And with this low pressure out towards eastern Europe, you'd expect this could be a lobe of tropospheric polar vortex, so bitterly cold air sitting over much of eastern Europe, getting drawn our way. Again, it's not a overwhelming signal, it's not guaranteed, we're months away, but it's another run that is showing potentially a cold and wintry pattern. January, February, March, which is the end of this latest run, that signal increases. Now it does get a little bit more diluted, you can see lots more yellows to our north, we're not seeing particularly strong oranges there either, the resolution does reduce, but still indicating substantial blocking through to the new year and the second half of winter. So the latest September ECMWF run is indicating colder and perhaps wintry pattern with northerly or even easterly winds with northern blocking developing through the winter months. Can't say much more than that from the looks of these. Can't guarantee it, but that is what they are showing at the moment. Now, if you look at the precipitation charts, again, this is not going to give us huge indications. It still is, a longer-term run, but it can give us good indications of where above average and below average precipitation will be. Again, giving good chance of knowing where high pressure, low pressure can position. Over the next couple of months, October, November, December, you can see lots of greens over the UK. This would indicate, as I said a minute ago, quite an unsettled and maybe even stormy autumn period. That signal does reduce a little bit through November, December, January, but still is slightly above average. So even though there is a pattern that colder conditions could develop, perhaps through December, January, the overwhelming signal here is still for generally unsettled conditions. As we head towards December, January, February, interestingly, still some greens to our south, but the majority of the greens are well to our south. We've got more browns out in the North Atlantic, again indicating perhaps a ridge of higher pressure. Of course, we have to look at these anomalies with sort of a global look, because you can see much of the northern hemisphere, there's lots of greens around, indicating perhaps there is a slight bias here to above average rainfall. So any browns is quite a remarkable, or does stand out quite a bit, indicating perhaps North Atlantic ridging, and that's the same through the January, February, March period. Again, could be quite unsettled through much of Europe, but unsettled doesn't necessarily mean mild. With this high pressure building out of the North Atlantic could mean the jet stream shifted northwards or split southwards and northwards, with us seeing more northerly or easterly flows, low pressure out towards southern Europe, and generally a cold and wintry pattern. Very interesting seeing that from the ECMWF today. Now, there's no point looking at a single run, we have to look at multiple runs to get a good consensus. Now, this is the Met Office mean sea level pressure. This is August base time though, and we're actually able to have a look on the Copernicus website at 1 month interval. So we'll be able to look out towards the end of the year, maybe even get towards January here. But these are 1 month, so will give us a better indication of individual months. Here, we've got high pressure out towards the north, low pressure to our south, and this could indicate a bit of a southerly tracking jet here. Again, could be relatively unsettled, but no massive hit to the early autumn. It could just indicate more northerly or easterly winds, perhaps slightly more unsettled conditions, and lower pressure out towards our south. October, no real anomaly out in the North Atlantic, lots of blues to our south, lower pressure to our south. Again, that could be probably more associated with the hurricane season, as that is the general Atlantic hurricane track coming out of Western Africa. That's probably what all these blues are associated with. But for the UK, no massive signal. November, signal starts to return a little bit, and you can see high pressure out towards the Atlantic, low pressure out from the west, and you see lots of blues to our north. This would indicate quite a westerly November, quite an unsettled, stormy and wet November. But December flips on its head. Blues are to our south and the oranges to our north, indicating northern blocking, perhaps cold, northerly, or more here with more of a Scandinavian block, easterly winds. Again, perhaps indicating colder blocked pattern. So it's slightly different to the ECMWF. This is more of an easterly based block, more towards Scandinavia, encouraging more easterly winds, whereas the ECMWF was more of a west based block towards Greenland, negative NAO with a northerly flow, but they're still similar with northern blocking, perhaps colder airflows. And finally, we head to January, you can see a very similar pattern. That blocking is still to our north, perhaps progressing slightly further westwards towards southern Greenland and Iceland. Low pressure to our south once again encouraging easterly flows or northeasterly flows. So both the ECMWF and the Met Office runs are going for colder patterns. And if we actually include the ECMWF August runs in that as well, another longer range chart going for a colder pattern. So it's not like I'm nitpicking the cold runs here. I'm showing you the Met Office and the ECMWF, two of the most highly regarded models in the world that professional forecasters use. Again, they probably use different exact runs than we do. They probably have more access to more runs, more data, but it's the same overall computer model. And it is indicating a blocked pattern as we head in towards the winter period. Now, if we also have a look at the precipitation associated with this, go through this quickly as I don't want this video to drag on too long, but once again, see dry weather out to our west, and Europe is generally, you can see dry weather out to our west, Europe is generally pretty neutral, quite unsettled to our south, again, probably more associated with the Atlantic hurricane season. October has some patchier green near the UK and the North Atlantic, again, would indicate precipitation. November's quite an unsettled and westerly phase. December flips, drier to our north, unsettled weather to our south, UK kind of in the middle, again would suggest under and close to higher pressure, but equally seeing lows run in as well. That could, and I mean could, be quite a cold and wintry, snowy pattern with high pressure to our north, low pressure to our south, weather fronts, moisture running into a colder block. I am looking very far forward here, 3 months forward, but that's what this pattern could indicate. And finally, January is fairly similar, perhaps low pressures sat further to our south, more high pressure to our north and west. Again, more of a northeasterly pattern here. If you also now have a look at the JMA, this is the exact same charts as we just saw for the Met Office, but for the JMA here, the Japanese Meteorological Agency. And if we do have a look, we can see September, high pressure over the top of us, so actually quite a warm, perhaps dry pattern. So interestingly, the main runs here for early autumn, slightly in disagreement, but agree more as we progress onwards. Perhaps that is signs that there is strong signals for what could happen through the winter period. October, high pressure to our north, low pressure to our south. This would be actually a pretty cold pattern if it was in the winter period with easterly winds, but here probably more of just an unsettled, cool pattern with the jet stream sat further southwards. November, it's actually quite similar to the UK Met, perhaps a little bit more blocking to our north, but plenty of blues to our west and our south, indicating quite a strong jet stream. And finally into December, quite a strong jet still, but high pressure moving more towards Scandinavia, so it does have that block, perhaps not quite as influential, and further to our north and our east. And finally, January has a lot of blocking around, but more sat over the top of us. So you can see from the JMA run, it's not bitterly cold, it's not as cold and wintry as the other runs would show. It could have some transient cold patterns in there, but the big similarity between it is it's got high pressure building to our north. It's just not in as advantageous position for colder weather than the other two runs had. So it doesn't rule it out, but it doesn't have as optimum sort of easterly or northerly pattern than the other two runs were indicating. But as I said, they all are very similar with trying to develop northern blocking through the late autumn, early winter period and consolidating it in December and January. November does look very unsettled on these three runs, so doesn't look like what we saw last year, where we saw some very cold signals through November, December before it tailed off. Here, it looks like it could be quite an unsettled westerly November, mild and wet, before it could turn blocked and cold into December and January. Very interesting seeing that today. Now, one of the reasons for that could be the zonal mean winds, a weaker than average polar vortex. Now, just to finish for the charts, if we just compared the precipitation as well, again, dry weather over the top of us for much of this month from the JMA. October, still dry weather to the north, maybe lower pressure returning, and you see November, very unsettled, lots of greens out to our west and our south. December, dry weather to our north and east, but low pressure out to the west, so it could be a bit of a battle between high pressure to our northeast and low pressure to our southwest. And January, again, it's a bit of a mixed signal, some high pressure around, some dry weather around, some wetter weather around, not too much of a signal over the UK, lots of greens well to our west, and kind of up and down over the UK, so a bit of a more of a mixed signal. But the reason we could be seeing a lot of this blocking through the early winter period, or December, January from these latest runs, could be down to the polar vortex. Now, again, we can't have a look at this in too much detail because it's way too far in advance for us to have a very strong grip on this. Again, these models aren't great more than maybe 2 or 3 weeks ahead, and even then sometimes can be wrong. And I remember here we're looking at 2 or 3 months ahead. But there is a signal from some of these charts that there could be slightly weaker than average zonal mean winds. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to cause colder weather, but that could help encourage it. And again, we can have a look at the latest August data from the various charts. Now, this is the latest ECMWF from August, and you can see the blue lines are all the ensembles. The black line is the expected climatology, the different shaded areas are sort of the different percentiles. And again, we can see the thick blue line is the ensemble mean. If we follow that towards early November, we are around average, maybe slightly below, but beyond November, December, January, all the way to the end of January, we're generally slightly below average until the new year, where we actually are significantly below average. Very, very interesting seeing that. That would, again, give an indication that it could be a slightly weaker polar vortex here, but we will have to see exactly how it does develop. But that would give perhaps an indication that there could be weaker than average zonal mean winds, again perhaps encouraging more blocking patterns, and yeah, definitely interesting and need to keep an eye on it. Not a massive signal, so we can't take too much from it, but it's more encouraging for colder, more blocked conditions like the runs were showing than if this was slightly above average. Now, if we have a look at the UK Met Office, this actually has a much stronger below average here, and you can see here this below average, it really is the strongest through early winter, through November, December time. That would equate to perhaps higher blocking chances through that December, January period. But interestingly, it goes above the daily climatology in early January. So again, that's giving perhaps the indication, as I said, that's giving the indication that weaker at the start of winter before turning stronger through the new year. So it is different to the ECMWF run, but it does give, again, early winter time or late autumn time could give a period of below average zonal mean winds, which again could encourage more blocking patterns. Now finally, for the zonal mean winds, have a look at the JMA. Again, late autumn, early winter, slightly below the daily climatology before well above average into early January. So this could again mean that we could encourage blocking patterns through early winter and maybe the latter part of winter more westerly flows. That's what these zonal mean winds would suggest, but we are looking well in advance. We can't take too much from this here. We're just trying to build lots of evidence and have a look at lots of data and try to build a picture from it. Not having a forecast by any means, but just build a rough picture at what the odds could be. Now finally, it's time to have a look at that all-important multi-system mean sea level pressure monthly charts. Now you can see here, this is putting all the runs together: ECMWF, Met Office, Meteo France, CMCC, DWD, NCEP, JMA, and the ECCC. Again, this is the August run, and it is all the runs put on top of each other. And again, it's probably going to have a very weak signal because we've got runs sort of outweighing each other. There could be a real blocked run and there could be a real unsettled run, and they kind of outweigh each other. So it'll be very interesting to see where this does come out. Now, if you run to the October period, you can see low pressure to our south, maybe a bit more high pressure here up towards Scandinavia. Again, that could indicate there are blocking patterns at times through October, but equally quite unsettled patterns in October. But as we head towards November, quite a similar signal from the runs with low pressure to our south, perhaps indicating a southerly tracking jet. That wouldn't give us anything spectacular in November, just generally kind of unsettled and cool conditions. And that is what we saw from some of the individual ECMWF and especially UK Met Office charts, with higher than average precipitation and more low pressure around. So there was a bit of a yellow blob to the east of Iceland, but can't look at that in too much detail. Into December, seeing no anomaly at all. Low pressure out to our south, but nothing really to our north. Sort of averaging itself out. Remember, white here doesn't necessarily mean all the runs are showing no anomaly. It means there's a big positive anomaly from some of the runs, but negative anomalies from others, and they're cancelling each other out. Into January, though, look what we see here. Yellows developing towards Greenland, and this would indicate northern blocking developing. So the runs here, if you weigh them all together, showing that quite a few of them are showing quite an overwhelming chance of northern blocking towards Greenland, Iceland, and perhaps developing easterly winds. Now, again, it's a very weak anomaly, but when we're putting all these charts together, we could have one real big blue anomaly, one big real low pressure anomaly, and that cancels another chart out. So we have to take that into account. But it does look likely here though a lot of the longer range charts are having a good go at forecasting some northern blocking as we head into the winter period. Again, it doesn't look like it's going to come in October, November time. Definitely last year we saw some cooler weather predictions in November, and we did see a very cold first week or two in December. Got slightly delayed, but it did come to fruition. Last year in these updates we were thinking a cold start to the winter. In the end, November wasn't too cold, but December was bitterly cold the first couple of weeks leading up to just before the Christmas period, before it did go more unsettled again. So we were roughly right last year with our timings. Again, we didn't make any bold predictions, but we were roughly correct. So it'll be very interesting to see again how the runs do, if the runs are do as well as they did last year with their rough timings of any blocking patterns, because here it would indicate perhaps December, but looking positive for January for colder and blocked weather. So anyway, I hope you have enjoyed looking at all these runs. Of course, go over to these websites if you're interested in having a look at them yourself. Of course, the base time will probably update to September in the very near future, and we'll probably have a look at that in our next winter look ahead, and we'll have a look at some various other charts as well, because we haven't even touched on the QBO yet, which is descending into an easterly phase, which again would encourage more blocked patterns. So things are looking encouraging if you are looking for a colder and wintry patterns into the winter period. Again, I can't guarantee we're going to see anything like December 2010 or a beast from the east, but all we can do is look at probabilities, and at the moment the probabilities are weighing in line with perhaps some colder and more blocked weather, at least at times. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you have enjoyed. While talking about cold and potentially wintry weather, I hope you're all having a great time out in the heat wave at the moment. It is pretty sweltering, so do make sure you go enjoy that, because before you know it, we will be looking at much cooler and cold weather over the coming weeks and the coming months. As I said, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.